Good afternoon. My name is Boy, and my presentation is on studying methods and academic performances. So why did I choose this topic? So back in sophomore year, I took my first AP class, which was AP World History. I struggled in this class for one main reason. It's because I never really had to study prior to this class. I would just listen to teacher lecture and do the assigned homeworks, which was enough to get me to an A. However, this was not the case for this class because it was really hard, and I had to find an effective studying method that was easily adaptable. So this leads me to my research question, which is, how do different studying methods affect academic performances among high school students? So I'll be measuring academic performances through GPA and ACT scores. And my goal of this research is to find studying methods that leads to a higher GPA and a higher ACT results, ultimately helping out students who are in my position. So some background information about AP classes and the ACT. So AP classes, so in the year 2022, Kim, a journalist from Washington Monthly, did an article in which she stated that the number of students taking AP classes has tripled since 2000. The main reasons why this has increased is because of GPA, is because AP classes help boost GPA. So for example, if a student got a B in an AP class, this is equivalent to getting an A in a regular class. Another reason why AP students who has taken AP has increased is that college credits are offered or given to students who pass the AP exam, allowing more students to take these classes. Although there are many advantages of taking AP classes, there are also disadvantages. One of the disadvantages comes from this guy named Gullihard, who is an Harvard educational specialist. He basically stated that students who do well on AP Calc exams often aren't able to maintain their knowledge of the material for a long period of time. This is due to the way AP tests are designed. He also stated that there are a correlation between AP exams and standardized tests. So standardized tests and AP exams are similar because they hinder students' ability to problem solve and think in a deeper manner. Another source that supported this argument is Gunzelman, who in his research about standardized tests stated that creative students are handicapped by standardized tests because it is designed for students who are able to get the most amount of questions right in the shortest amount of time. So GPA and the gap, the significance. So there are two articles that have inspired my research. So the first one is called Radical Raceway. This is basically where a group of researchers conducted an experiment on this one social study class of all ninth graders. The teachers noted that the students were getting lazier and lazier doing their homework, which led to a decrease in their scores and GPA. So what the researchers did was they implemented Radical Raceway. This is basically a reward system where if students do well on their homework and tests, they basically give them gifts and stuff. This ultimately helped students increase their GPA scores and their overall test grades. And one gap to this research is that they only use one method, which is what I'm trying to fill. I'm going to use 6 methods instead of one. And I'm also going to be focusing on the ACT instead of just GPA. So another study that also inspired my research is intended versus actual. In this study, the authors allowed their students to pick 10 different studying methods, and after picking these studying methods, they want the students to predict what their score or GPA is going to be by the end of the semester. And they basically use their studying methods to predict it, allowing them to know what it is. And the main gap for this research is that they didn't conduct an experiment on the ACT. They only focused on the GPA. For mine, I'll be focusing on both GPA and ACT. So I have three main hypotheses. My main hypothesis is that there is a correlation between studying methods and academic performances of GPA and ACT scores. My two sub-hypotheses is that students who chooses taking notes and looking over notes will score or will have the highest GPA, and students who chooses practice tests will have highest ACT scores. So my method to test out my hypothesis is a survey. So I've created a 12 questionnaire survey through Google Forms, and these questions will ask students about their demographics, such as their race, their gender. It'll also ask them about their preferred studying method and their overall GPA and ACT scores. So the target of my research is sophomore, juniors, and seniors. I excluded out freshmen because most freshmen haven't taken the ACT. And finally, I will be distributing my survey through poster and through my Instagram stories. Yes. Okay, so the results of the questionnaire shows that there is a majority of females, Asians, and seniors. So one of the questions asks, how do you usually prepare for quizzes, tests, and exams? In here, it shows that most students, 31 out of 40 students preferred looking over notes, which is pretty skewed towards that. And this would also eventually lead me to their GPA, because like quizzes, practice tests, and exams are all connected to their GPA. So nextly, I also asked them what their GPA is, and surprisingly, no one had a GPA of 2.0 to a 2.5, and most of the students, like 40% of them, which is 16 out of 40, had a GPA of 4.1 or higher. This means that they have taken at least one AP class. So this graph shows a combination of the previous two graphs and bar graphs, and this bar graph shows that looking over notes had the highest GPA overall, and this shows and proves that my hypothesis was accepted. I also did the same for ACT. As you can see, practice tests was heavily skewed, and most students chose to do practice tests, over 31 out of 40. On my next graph, I asked them what their highest score on the ACT was without the super score. And in here it shows that the majority of students had an ACT score of 21 or higher. So in here, this is also a combination of the previous two graphs on the ACT. It shows that the practice test had the highest students choosing a practice test, and the highest students who were able to get the highest ACT scores. This is also supported by one of my sources, by Eldrikin, who works at a learning clinic where they basically utilize his previous ACT test, and they basically use it to help their students get a higher composite score. This also shows that my hypothesis was accepted, because students who chose practice tests did really well on ACT, getting a 31, a 26, and to a 36. So to test out my main hypothesis, which is there a correlation between studying methods and academic performances, I will be using a chi-square test of independence. So a chi-square test requires two two categorical data, and it also requires two conditions. The first one is that it has to be randomly sampled. The second one is that in each category it has to have at least five values, and I did this for both the ACT and GPA. So chi-square test. The results of the chi-square test on the GPA showed the p-value of 0.808 was greater than the alpha. The alpha is always 0.05 when it's not given. So this shows that my hypothesis was ultimately rejected, stating that there is no correlation between studying methods and GPA. So this is the results for the chi-square test on the ACT. It also has a p-value of 0.21, which is also greater than the alpha value of 0.05, which also means that my hypothesis of the correlation between ACT and studying method was also rejected. So some of my limitations were on the chi-square test. Some of the categories had a values of zeros, as you can see here, and most of the categories didn't have a value of 5 or greater. And the reason for this is that I didn't have enough sampling data. And another reason might be is convenience bias. So when I posted my survey on my Instagram story, it only restricted my survey to my followers, which is convenience bias survey. Also, the last one that I didn't consider when I did this test was the students' time they took to study for their quizzes, tests, and for the ACT. So, conclusion. Although there was no correlation between academic performances and studying methods, the bar graph showed a strong correlation and association between students who took notes with higher GPA and students who took practice exams with a high ACT scores.
All right, 12 minutes. That's really good.
Okay.
Questions?
All right.
I can't ask you.
Yeah. Okay. Number one.
How did you? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. How did you evaluate the sources you collected to make sure they would be credible, valid, and reliable? Which sources did you discard and why?
So, in order to find reliable sources, I used EBSCOhost. EBSCOhost allows us to check off scholarly works and very credible sources. I also researched the author's background to see if they are credible or not. One of the sources that I found that I didn't use was on cramming. Many students didn't really use cramming on my survey, so I took it out of my research.
Okay. What additional questions emerged during your research? Based on your recent experience, what advice would you give to other researchers who might choose to investigate those questions?
So the big question I have is that if I had a larger sample size, would the p-value change, and would there be a correlation between studying methods and academic performances? What's the second part?
And based on your recent experience, what advice would you give to other researchers who might choose to investigate those questions?
Okay, so before you run any test, I would suggest you find conditions for that test and get at least 100 sample sizes, especially for this research, since there's so many categories in each of the things.
What unexpected turn did you encounter as your research progressed, and what were the reasons for this change in direction or focus, and how did you modify your method or approach?
Can you repeat that?
I'll tell you the first part. So what unexpected turn did you encounter as your research progressed?
What encounters did I?
Like how your hypothesis was proven wrong.
Or
Okay.
Like you
Just any
expected
changes,
something,
right?
but you
Just any
did
changes
not become
did you encounter in your research?
So any changes?
Pardon the interruption. How's that paper go? Everything's going good.
Sorry.
I can repeat that question.
What unexpected turn did? Okay, should I? I don't know how to rephrase this.
Just-
What's something unexpected that happened while you were researching?
Okay, yes, my hypotheses were rejected, and that was very unexpected, especially the correlation. Because on the bar graph, it showed that students who scored really high on the ACT had who chose practice exams, but that wasn't enough to show correlation because I did a chi-square test. Because if I just looked at the bar graph, it does show a strong association, but if I did a test, it doesn't show any correlation.
The second part.
What were the reasons for this change? And I think you answered that. How did you modify your method or approach?
How do I modify it?
But I don't think you can answer hypothesis for this because that's not an unexpected encounter. That's just something you measure. Like that's just your result, right? So how is
You
that?
Yeah.
predicted something and it was unexpected.
But that's the whole point of the experiment. That's
It's
not
to
that's
predict
not
the
a, that's not an unexpected turn.